The Rebbe soll gesund sein began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today is Shabbos Mevorchim Elul. And he immediately referred to a famous Sikha from the Farbrengen Rebbe, whereby the Farbrengen Rebbe describes that as of Shabbos Mevorchim Elul, or at the latest Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Elul, if Rosh Chodesh Elul would fall out on a Shabbos, when this period of time would arrive in Lubavitch, the expression in the Sikha is that the wind of Elul would begin to blow. In other words, it already began introducing a mood of Elul. And today we are already benching this Rosh Chodesh, we're benching the month of Elul, and this, as this year's Kviyos is, Rosh Chodesh Elul does not fall out on a Shabbos, but Rosh Chodesh Elul falls out on Tuesday and Wednesday, as the Rebbe will get to in a few minutes. So therefore, this inyan of proper preparations to the month of Elul already begins as of today. And it is also known what it is stressed in Chassidus, the expression Rosh Chodesh rather than Tchilas HaChodesh. Obviously, the question is asked in Chassidus, and the Rebbe is quoted today from the Ateres Rosh, from the Mittler Rebbe. Whenever we refer to Rosh Hashanah or to Rosh Chodesh, actually it's only the beginning of the month or the beginning of the year. So the proper expression should have been Tchilas Hashanah, or rather Tchilas HaChodesh. And knowing that in Lashon HaKodesh everything is extremely accurate, we see that we refer to these days with the title of Rosh Chodesh or Rosh Hashanah. Why? So Chassidus explains, just like the Rosh is the leader and contains within it, gives out guidance to the entire body, the very same Rosh Chodesh as well as Rosh Hashanah. So now we are on the Shabbos Mevorchim, when we are benching the month of Elul, and from this month, this is the month of Elul, and today we are benching this month, and this week we will have Rosh Chodesh Elul, and the inyan of the Rosh Chodesh is that this is the beginning, not only the beginning of the month, but this contains within it the entire guidance for the entire month. What is the inyan Bechlal of the month of Elul? The expression Kol Yoima V'Yoima Ovid Avidite, every day has its inyan. Alachas Kama V'Kama, how much more so is it when we are not only talking B'Negeya a day, we are talking B'Negeya a period of time. So we must say that when we're talking B'Negeya this period of time of the month of Elul, that there's something very, very special which this month differs in as opposed from all other months. What is the inyan of Elul? The month of Elul is Inyanei Rachmim. This is the month when we address the Rebishter, we stress Tefillah much more than the entire year. To such an extent, the Rebbe quoted from Achronim that we know Bechlal, Klal Yisrael is divided into two categories. There are those whose inyan is Yisachar, and those whose inyan is Zevul, those whose inyan is to be Loim de Torah, and those who are involved in supporting the Loim de Torah. So it is brought in Svarim that even those whose inyan is that they are the Yisachar of Klal Yisrael, in other words, they are the ones that sit and learn all day, and this is what they do constantly. When it comes the month of Elul, they have to be memayit bilimudam, they have to reduce in their learning, and be marbe betfilo betachnunim, and to add more in tefillah and tachnunim. So this is the whole idea of this month. So what does Elul stand for? The inyan of doing more tefillah than we do during the entire year. And as we know from the Rambam tells us what is the inyan of mitzvahs hatfilah min ha-Torah. Min ha-Torah, the obligation of tefillah is that when we have anything special, any specific request which we want from the Rabbeinu Shalom, how do we request it from the Rabbeinu Shalom? This is done through tefillah. Gemara says, "Ein oimdin lehispalel ela mitoich koived roish," which the pshat of it means that how does one begin davening? He needs a proper preparation, bringing himself into a real proper mood of tefillah. The Rebbe here brought a taich from the Maggid that the Maggid teaches, what's the pshat in Oimden lehispalel metoich koived roish, that there is a koived roish from the Shechina, from the Rabbeinu Shalom. What's the pshat? Based on what the Gemara tells us, that when the Rebishter drove the Yidden into Galus, it created by the Rebishter also an inyan of kalani meroishi, kalani mizroi. In other words, it affected the Rabbeinu Shalom as well in a very strong way. So it brought the Rebishter into a position of koived roish kaviyachol. In other words, using a simple terminology, it's hard on the Rebishter, it's a pressure on the Rebishter as well that the Yidden are driven into Galus. So when the Maggid teach, what's the pshat in Oimden lehispalel metoich koived roish, that when Yidden begin davening, Yidden daven their mispalel to alleviate the Rebishter's koived roish, that the hardships which the Rebishter kaviyachol is in should be alleviated. Naturally, how will this be alleviated? By the Rabbeinu Shalom taking us out of Galus and bringing to Geula. So this will take away the koived roish from the Rabbeinu Shalom. This will take away the kalani meroishi, kalani mizroi, which the Rebishter came into. Once the Rebishter sent Yidden into Galus, this will be taken away from him, and this is what Yidden are mispalel for. So again, it's also, as the Rebbe explains, so it's also an inyan of a bakosha srochav. So we're again asking for some specific thing, whatever the thing may be, whether it is a gashmiistic thing or it's a ruchniistic thing. Whatever inyan we may be asking for, this is where tefillah applies. Min HaTorah. That's the whole inyan of tefillah. Now when we're talking B'negeya this entire month of Elul, that the month of Elul is set aside for a month of tefillah, so this is the whole month is in Yonai tefillah. In the course of the first Sikha, I also referred to what's mentioned in Tanya, how Ahava, love to the Rabbeinu Shalom, is the shayrish, is the source of all the mitzvahs asay which we fulfill. Rebbe explained, if so, it applies b'negeya to the mitzvah of yira, to the mitzvah of fearing the Rebishter as well. So, obviously it's something very strange created. The fact that we love the Rabbeinu Shalom, ahava, to the Rabbeinu Shalom, this is the source for fulfilling all mitzvahs asay, even the mitzvah of yira, of fearing him as well. So actually it is the great love which we have to the Rabbeinu Shalom which also ultimately brings to fear of the Rabbeinu Shalom. So the Rebbe tied it in. So how we see that b'negeya ava v'yira come together. The same thing when we're talking b'negeya yidin, an attitude which has to be expressed from one yid to another. It's always an attitude of ava that has to supersede in the expression from one yid to another. Obviously the Rebbe was referring to some sort of an incident which took place, but the Rebbe was stressing very, very strong how when we criticize Yidden, and particularly in the month of Elul, it has to be done with a tremendous feeling of love. Not to criticize Yidden in a format of Zidlen, which is a Yiddish expression which means just hollering and degrading Yidden. This is no way to say Musa to Yidden. The proper and right way, when one wants to improve another Yid and see to it that another Yid should be improved, how can this be done? This can only be done through a proper expression of ahava, of love from one Yid to another. This has been again the month of Elul in general. Rosh Chodesh Elul can come out on various kviyas. As we just mentioned earlier, could be that Rosh Chodesh Elul should fall out on a Shabbos, as could be the kviyas. However, this year it is not so. This year Rosh Chodesh Elul comes out on Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday, we know, has a tremendous great mila. The mila on Tuesday is that is hukfal boiki toiv. In the creation of Tuesday it is mentioned twice the expression of toiv. Vayar Hashem, Rebishter saw that it is toiv. And as Chazal interpreted, it is toiv la shamayim v'toiv la briyos. The day of Tuesday has a specialty within it. It's a double good. It's good l'inyanei shamayim and it's good l'inyanei briyos. Rebbe elaborated in this explanation, and he said that when we're talking about such an inyan, which is so obvious to the extent that it is expressed in the briyas ha'olam, this is something which has to be understood and accessible by each and every yid. Not only for exceptions, but each and every yid has to have a proper understanding and be able to fulfill this inyan of Tov la Shamayim v'Tov la Briyos. And when we're talking Tov L'Shamayim v'Tov L'Briyos, it doesn't mean that part of the Tuesday is Tov L'Shamayim, and another part of the Tuesday is Tov L'Briyos. And we keep on going back and forth. This is not so. What it really means is that each and every moment of Tuesday possesses within it this great inyan that it has both Milas Tov L'Shamayim v'Tov L'Briyos in the very same moment. As the Rebbe explained that, for example, when we give tzedakah, or we express any other attitude of chesed, why do we do this? We do this because the Rebbeinu Shalom wanted us to do so. Here we have a combination of Tov L'Shamayim and Tov L'Briyos at the same time. It is an act of Tov L'Briyos. It is an act of giving tzedakah. However, why do we do this act? This is because the Rebbeinu Shalom has instructed us to do so. Or furthermore, as Chazal say, Hadbek b'midaisa. It is our inyan to attach ourselves in the same attitude as the Rebbeinu Shalom. Mahu rachum af ata rachum. Mahu chanun af ata chanun. The same way the Rebbeinu Shalom acts, we should act. To such an extent, the Rebbe says, even in day-to-day life we see it, that a father's main interest is that all the good qualifications which he possesses should be going over to his children as well. So he would like to see his children following his footsteps in all the good that he does. On the contrary, if a father knows and is aware of the faults that he possesses, then he definitely does not want to inherit these faults to his children. So the same when we are doing in Yonim of Tov L'Briyos, we are doing these Tov L'Briyos acts as a result of Tov L'Shamayim. So here we have Tov L'Shamayim and Tov L'Briyos being combined in one. Why are we doing these in Yonim of Tov L'Shamayim, these in Yonim of Tzedakah v'Chesed and so forth? This comes as a result of the fact that we want to follow the instruction of the Rebbeinu Shalom Hadbik b'midays of being attached in his midays in the inyan which the Rebbeinu Shalom wants us to do. And when these requests come into the category of Tov L'Briyos, then we combine Tov L'Shamayim and Tov L'Briyos simultaneously. And particularly this Kviyas also falls out that today is Shabbos Pashas Riyei. Riyei means vision, see. Rei, see. And the Rebbe stressed the greatness of the power of vision above, as it's explained in Chassidus, there's an inyan of Havana v'Asaga, there's an inyan of understanding, Yediyah, knowledge of something. However, Re'iyah supersedes all these koiches. And here each and every Yid is told that he's given koiches from the Rebishter to be a Re'ei, to be able to see Getlichkeit, to see the greatness that is hidden in Torah and Mitzvahs, and to be able to see the greatness of a Elokus of Getlichkeit. Later, in the Farbrengen, Rebbe Zalgazansan referred to the Rashi which he explained in last week's Farbrengen. In last week's Farbrengen, the Rebbe explained the Rashi which deals with regarding the Luchos. In Parashas Eikev, Torah tells us how Moshe Rabbeinu came back with the Luchos. And there we find, in Parashas Eikev, we find Luchos spelled various ways. Luchos simply means plural, two Luchos. The proper way to spell Luchos plural would be Lamet Vav Ches Vav Sof. However, if we look into Chumash, if we look into Parashas Eikev, we will notice that is in Kapitel Tes, a series of psukim from Pasuk Tes on quite a few times. The word Luchos is mentioned many times, various types of spellings. First we find it in Pasuk Tes, Lamet Vav Ches Sof. Now the first Vav is not the Vav that makes it plural. The first Vav is the Vav from Luach. Which Vav is the Vav that makes it plural? That's the second Vav, Luchos. The Vav that should come between the Ches and the Sof, that's what makes the word plural. If we look into Pasuk Yud Aleph, there we have Vahimi Keitz Arboim Yom V'Arboim Laila Nosna Hashem Elai Shnei Luchos Avonim Luchos Abris. Here we have, in the very same pasuk, Luchos spelled twice. Once it's spelled without any vav, and the second time, luchos habris, it's spelled with a vav between the ches and the saf, which makes it plural. So the question arises, obviously, in the very same pasuk, we have the same word spelled differently. So that is why Rashi is forced to comment, luchos ksiv sheshteim Shabbos. Comes to tell us that the word luchos is spelled chasa, to tell us that both luchos were the same size. Incidentally, last week when we were going over the sichos, we were learning that both of the luchos had the same kedusha. This is an error. Pshat in the Rashi is that both luchos were the same size. What is the nayis that both luchos were the same size? The Rebbe Elgezinsan added on today and explained the nayis is a very big one, because we know in Chazal there's an expression bidei adam I efshel litzamtzim. If a human being is trying to make two luchos, let's say, or any items, and he's trying to make them the same size, they will never come out the identical same size. It is impossible for a human being to do it. However, the Rabbeinu Shalom, being that this was created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he is powerful to make shteim Shabbos, to make them both the same. So that is why the Torah spells us luchos in a singular, rather than it should be luchos plural, comes to teach us a special ha'irah, a special lesson, that shneim Shabbos. And as the Rebbe Zilgazunsen explained last week why it is dafkan, this pasuk that Rashi comments, why not on any other psukim where the word luchos is spelled singular. Today, the Rebbe Zilgazunsen raised the question that shechlal, this inyan of words being spelled chaser and molei, we find many, many times in the Torah. In other words, a word that could be spelled with a vav or without a vav, and is spelled one way or another. Let me use the expression, we have hundreds of such cases in Chumash. And nonetheless, we do not see that each time such a problem arises in Chumash, Rashi should comment on it. We have many, many such cases. And still in all, Rashi doesn't comment that this word is written a chaser or it is written a molei and so forth. And the Rebbe brought several examples throughout Chumash which we find where Rashi does comment and where Rashi doesn't. For example, a very famous one is going back in Parshas Lech Lecha. Efron Yoshev, the Meister with Avram Avinu, when Avram Avinu had to acquire the Me'oras HaMachpelah. So the expression there is regarding to Efron. He was the one that sold the Me'oras HaMachpelah to Avram Avinu. So expression the pasuk is Yoshev. Efron sat. How is Yoshev spelled? Yud Vav Shin Beis. Still the Torah there spells Yud Shin Beis, spelled as a chaser. Yoshav Ksiv. Rashi there tells us that really it was something special which the Rebbe did. That it was on that day that Ephraim was appointed as a leader in that community. Being that Avram Avinu was supposed to have dealings with him, so it should be suitable that Avram Avinu should deal with a kavadik person, with a choshev a person. So that is why on that day, Oiseh Hayoim, Rashi uses the expression, Oiseh Hayoim Minuhu Shofet Aleim. On that day they appointed him as a shofet. The word Toildos, for example. Toildos, Molei, should be spelled Tov Vav Lamet Daled Vav Sof. If we look through Torah, the word Toildos is written Molei only twice. Eile Toildos HaShamayim V'Haaretz, and also the Eile Toildos which were born to Tamar, Peretz and Zorach. Why is it that these Toildos are spelled in Parshas Vayeshev? These Toildos are spelled Molei as opposed to all over in Chumash, Toildos are spelled Chaser. So there's a Medrash. Medrash tells us that really these two Toildos have something in common. Being that Mashiach is a descendant of Shevet Yehuda, of Peretz and Zorach. Therefore, when will the world be b'miluoi, the Toildos HaShamayim V'Haaretz, when will that be b'miluoi? When the Eile Toildos Peretz V'Zorach will be b'miluoi. In other words, when Mashiach will come. That is when the world will be at its highest peak. It's something which is a medrash, and it's something which is a question which is aroused. Obviously, it's something which is very obvious. Always told this is spelled chasa, here told this is spelled malay. Still, we see Rashi doesn't come. The word ta'imim, twins. There's the word ta'imim by Rivka when she was pregnant with Yaakov Yosef. Then we have ta'imim again in Pashas Vayeshev by Tamar. Once ta'imim is written chasa, once ta'imim is written malay. It is by Rivka where Rashi comments. Furthermore, in Pashas Vayeshev, Rashi does not comment. It's something which we see that many times Rashi gets involved in it, into a malay. Rashi times does not get involved in it, and so forth. Pardon? Okay. Times Rashi does, and at times Rashi doesn't. Here the word luchos, the whole union of luchos is really discussed in Pashas Kisisa as well. In Pashas Kisisa, Rashi also comments. The same comment which Rashi says here. But Rashi adds one word. What is the word that Rashi adds? Shahoyu shteyin shavos. Rashi adds on a word, shahoyu. They were both the same. Why doesn't Rashi say the word shahoyu here? Or, if it's that important, if here Rashi could get away without the shahoyu, why does Rashi say the shahoyu in Pashas Kisisa? This the Rebbe found that is very simple. Pashas Kisisa discusses the luchos rishonos. Here Pashas Eikev discusses the luchos achronos. When we're talking about the luchos rishonos which were broken, there are no more shavos. That is why Rashi is compelled to add on the word shehayu shneim shavos. There were once shavos. However, now they are no longer shavos because when the luchos were broken, there's no one that says, or there's nowhere that says, that when the luchos were broken, they were broken into the same size, into pieces, and that the pieces were the same size pieces, the one side of the luach and the other side of the luach. This is not so. However, when the luchos were complete, shehayu, when they were in one piece, then they were shavin, then they were both alike. However, here Rashi is not talking about the luchos rishonos. Here Rashi is already talking about the luchos achronos. The luchos achronos, Rashi cannot add on the word shehayu. It's not shehayu. It's not something of the past tense. It's something of present. Moshe came down with the luchos, and the luchos are shneim shavos. It is not shehayu. They are in present tense. This is the position that they are in. The luchos are shneim shavos. Rebbe Zilgazin went into a lengthy interpretation that it is only where there's something obvious, not understood, in Pshuta Shel Mikra, that is when Rashi is forced to get involved into commenting on the concept of Malay and Chasa. Otherwise, if there's nothing lacking in Pshuta Shel Mikra, and there's no obvious question in Pshuta Shel Mikra, there are, as he said, hundreds of cases of Malay and Chasa, and this is not Rashi's inyan to get involved and to interpret each Malay and Chasa case. Afterwards, it was in the Maimer, the Rebbe Zilgazin began based on the pasuk of this week's Seder of Re'ei Anoichi Neisen Lefneichem Hayoim, and tied it into Mamorim from the Alter Rebbe, from the Tzemach Tzedek, that have a shaykhis to Ani L'Doidi V'Doidi Li, which are the Inyanim, which abbreviates Elul, and that has a obvious shaykhis to Elul. The Rebbe quoted from the Mamorim, from the Alter Rebbe, from the Tzemach Tzedek, that B'shas Matan Torah, when it was Ponim Beponim Diber Hashem Imochem, when the Rebbe addressed each and every Jew, this brought about that the Pnimius of the Rebbe, the Pnimius of Shem Havaya, got into each and every Yid who was present by Matan Torah. And each and every Yid possesses within himself the Pnimius of the Rebbe. And the Alter Rebbe goes on in that Maimer, that is why the Chazal say, Rishoyim Meleim Charotes, those that sin are constantly full of regret. The Alter Rebbe explains what is this inyan of regret, because each and every Yid has a nitzutz of Shem Havaya within him. And therefore, after he has sinned, and after he has done Averas, all of a sudden, Hurei Tshuva come to this person. What are these Hurei Tshuva? These Hurei Tshuva are the nitzutz of Shem Havayim that is within each and every Yid. And therefore, being that each and every Yid has a nitzutz of Shem Havaya within him, that is what we see brings by various Yidden the inyan that after they have gone through various inyanim of averas, all of a sudden they get within themselves feelings of regret. Where does this stem from? This stems from the shame havaya that was instilled into each and every yid. B'shas matan Torah. The Rebbe asked, this is benegei those yidden who we see get these feelings of tshuva, these hirura tshuva. However, what is with these yidden who as yet we do not see them getting hirura tshuva? We do not see the awakening of the shame havaya that is within them. Rebbe explained that, the Rebbe explains in Igeres HaTshuva that there is the yud of the Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya Bechlal is in Yonei Chochmeh, which this ties together, the Sfiras HaChochmeh, which ties together Yidden and the Eibishter. However, there is the yud of Shem Havaya, and we know that a yud has a koitzer shel yud, the top of the yud. The top of the yud, the Rebbe explains, this is Sfiras HaKesach. The Rebbe expressed himself that he would say this b'derech efsher. In other words, the Rebbe said he's not definite if this is so. He's saying it on a maybe basis. This was the Rebbe's expression this afternoon, b'derech efsher. Incidentally, there's an episode by Chassidim related that the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Nishmas Eden, was once discussing an Inyan in Chassidus with his son, the Frierdiker Rebbe. And he also discussed an Inyan in Chassidus, and he used the expression that it is b'derech efsher. He's not sure that it is so. It seems to be so. When the Frierdiker Rebbe later repeated the Inyan, he did not use the expression b'derech efsher anymore. And he added on later that he commented that this Inyan he heard from his father and a b'derech efsher, aber dem Tatens a b'derech efsher is bei uns a vadoes. Rebbe Zalgizan, however, used the expression it is b'derech efsher, but vadoes, it's definite. By us, we take it for granted. Being that there is something which comes above the yud, which this is the koitzer shel yud, this is the in a spheres, this is higher than the regular yud kei vav kei. In spheres, this is the inyan of spheres hakesa, and this is the nekudas hayados which each and every yid possesses, which at no time can chas v'shalom disappear by a yid. The only thing is, at time being, he doesn't feel it and it is not awakened, as the Alter Rebbe explains at length in Tanya. Therefore the Rebbe says, being that sof kol sof, it is bal yidach mimenu nidach, each and every yid will ultimately do tshuva. What will awaken the tshuva in those yidden, where the shem havaya is behelim, it is not begilu, by them it will be the koitzer shel yud, which in spheres it is spheres hakesa. This will awaken within them also the hirura tshuva, that ultimately it will be bal yidach mimenu nidach, and no yid will go away without tshuva. Later in the Farbrengen, as usual, the Rebbe learned the Rashi in this week's Sedre. Thank you. In this week's Sedre in Pashas Riyei, Kapitel Tes Vav, Pasuk Ches. The Torah here is talking about tzedakah. And Torah says, Pasayach tiftach es yod chaloi, v'hav, you should open your hand to the other man. Rashi comments, Pasayach tiftach is a double expression. Afilu kam upon him. Not only once, but even many times. Let us go to Psukim weiter. Pasuk Yud. Pasuk here is talking about tzedakah. Again, and the Pasuk says, Nasein titen loy, you shall give him. You should not feel bad when you give him. What does Rashi comment? Nasein titen loy, afilu meya pa'amim. You shall give even 100 times. Two psukim, one next to another. Each of the psukim use a double expression. And as we find in Chazal, whenever a double expression is used, it requires interpretation. However, why is it that by Pesach Tiftach, Rashi comments, afilu kam upon him, even several times. When it comes to Nasein Titein, Rashi says even 100 times. Also, Pesach Tiftach es yot chaloi, the pasuk says. We're going back to the first pasuk, the pasuk Ches. Then the pasuk continues, V'havei tavitenu deimach seiroi asher yechsar loi. So obviously the word loi is used twice here in the pasuk. Comes to quoting the words of the pasuk, Rashi only quotes which words Pesach Tiftach. It comes to Nasein Titein, Pasuk says, Nosen titin loy. Rashi quotes the word loy as well. Obviously, because the pasuk goes on, Nosen titin loy, so the word loy is used twice, extra. There's one loy already. Why is there a second loy? So Rashi quotes the word loy. But in pasuk ches, there are also two loys. Pasayach tiftach es yotcha, v'havit havitenu demech seira sheyechseloi, the pasuk could have said. Why is there an extra loy? Rashi does not quote the obvious extra loy in pasuk ches. So this obviously requires some sort of interpretation. Rabbi Zildenson explains, if we think into the words Pasayach Tiftach and Nosein Titain, there is a little bit of difference between Pasayach Tiftach and Nosein Titain. And he's explaining it into Pshat, in the realm of Pshat. Pasayach Tiftach means open your hand. In other words, you are with a closed hand. Go ahead and open your hand to the poor. How many times a day can you go ahead and open your hand? Can't do it all day. Simple. There are other things we have to do during the day as well. We have to daven. We have to learn. We have many other mitzvahs that come in to the daily schedule which we have to fulfill. Therefore, when the Torah says Pasayach Tiftach, Pasayach Tiftach is an experience which we can only have come upon. However, Nosein Titain. Nosein Titain means give. The Rebbe brought several examples. For example, we know there's one day a year which we excel in and stuck in, and that is the day of Purim. Purim, poor people constantly keep on coming. There is no need for Pasayach Tiftach. All we have to do is Nosein Titain. We sit ready with money in our hands or in front of us, or we have access to it immediately. And as the poor person comes in, we give it to him right away. Nosein Titain. This is something which we could do even upon him as well. For example, the Rebbe brought another example. When poor people get aware that a very wealthy and philanthropic person comes into a city, so everybody starts bombarding this person, comes knocking on his door, and everybody wants to get some sort of a donation from him. Now here the person does not have to be in a position of constantly Pasayach Tiftach. The Pasayach Tiftach has to be done once. Once he's Pasayach Tiftach, he's constantly Nosein Titain, he's giving. He prepares an amount which he wants to allocate that day for tzedakah to all the people who are going to see him that day. And whoever's going to see him that day, he keeps on handing out tzedakah to. So Nosein Titain, Rashi says, this could be something which we could do even upon him. However, Pasayach Tiftach, to adjust himself, to give tzedakah, and to prepare himself, and to all of the preparations that are needed, this is something which a person can go through kam upon him, but not upon him. Why, when it comes to Pasayach Tiftach, Rashi does not quote the word loy. However, when it comes to Nosein Titain, Rashi does quote the word loy. If I understood correctly, the Pasayach Tiftach es yotcha loy. Here the loy can be interpreted not only loy to him. The loy can be interpreted him here, it is because of him, to libem. In other words, Pasayach Tiftach es yotcha, you shall open your hand loy because of him. So it's like, because there is a poor person who is in need of it. That is why the Torah tells us, Pasayach Tiftach es yotcha loy. So that is why Rashi goes by without any comment on this. But Negeya, as it's customary by the Rebbe to learn a piece of the Zohar with the comments of his father, in every Shabbos Farbrengen, in Parshas Riyeh, there are no comments from his father on the Zohar. But the Rebbe found a piece in Parshas Shmois, which deals with the month of Elul. At the very end of his commentary, the Rebbe's father's commentary in Parshas Shmois, there is something that deals with the month of Elul. And this is what he explained in today's Farbrengen. The Hemshech to last Shabbos, the Rebbe says both Shabbosim have a shaychus. The truth is, there's an expression, Shabbos, my name is Baruch in Kula Yomen. Shabbos gives bracha to all the following days of the week. The Rebbe says there are some Mefarshim that learn that the pshat is to all following days of the week and does not include the following Shabbos. Rebbe says this is very strange. Why should we exclude the following Shabbos from bracha? True, there's an expression in the Torah that when the Rebbe came to Shabbos, Vayevarech Oisai, the Rebbe blessed the Shabbos. However, if we can have additional bracha on Shabbos, we should definitely seek for it. So the expression Shabbos minay mizboch in kula yomin, that Shabbos gives bracha to all the following days of the week, definitely applies not only to the following weekdays, but it also applies to the following Shabbos. Memela, this Shabbos today, 27 days in the month of Av, has a shayches to last Shabbos, which was 20 days in the month of Av. Based on what Chazal say, Shabbos minay mizboch in kula yomin. It was in last week's Farbrengen the Rebbe paid special tribute to those people who were fortunate to be with his father in Russia in his very last periods of life, and they were fortunate to be him mishamesh, to service him and be around him. And it was in last week's Farbrengen where the Rebbe called them over and gave them, these few people gave them each a bottle of mashke as a token of recognition and appreciation. Today the Rebbe again spoke about it, and he expressed himself that really these people who assisted his father when his father was in need of assistance, really these people substituted him. Because al pi halacha, he was the one that should have been there and should see to it that his father should have had whatever he needed. So therefore he again very, very much appreciates those people who were out in those days in Russia assisting his father. And that is why in last week's Farbrengen he asked them to come over and he would give them each a bottle of mashke, because he wanted to have an opportunity, as he expressed himself today, to say l'chaim together with these people. However, it seems like Rebbe said that there were some people present last week and are still present this week's Farbrengen, that for whatever reason they are extremely shy and they hide, and therefore when he called on those people who should come over, who were fortunate enough to be of assistance to his father when his father was in need of physical assistance, literally people that should help him be in mishamish, these individuals were shy to come up and participate in this thing. So therefore he's again suggesting that if there's anyone present who was fortunate to be of assistance to his father when his father was in need of it, when his father was weak and when his father was in gullus in his last days, and did not come over to say l'chaim in last week's Farbrengen, he's suggesting that they do it in this week's Farbrengen. And there were two individuals that went over to the Rebbe right after the Rebbe spoke about this. The Rebbe gave them each some wine from his becha, and they said l'chaim, and they went back to their places. But again, the inyan of the Zohar, which is the Zohar at the end of Parsha Shmois, the Aorus of Zohar, that is where he refers to the pasuk Ani l'doidi v'doidi li, which is the Rosh Tevis of Elul, and there he explains that Elul is bigematria the same as Bina, Sfiras HaBina. The Rebbe raised the question: Bina, we know, has a shaykhis to Torah. That's the whole inyan of Torah. Chochma Bina, Chochmaschem u'Binaschem, it's the inyan of Torah. Elul, on the other hand, is an inyan, as we just discussed. What's the whole inyan of Elul? To be marbe b'tfilah, to be marbe b'rachmim. So what's the shaykhis between Elul having a shaykhis to Sfiras HaBina? Bina is in Yonah Torah, and obviously Elul is in Yonah Tfilah. So there you have it. So Rebbe explained that in Elul they are both in Yonim. There is taka the inyan in Elul, how Elul has a shaykhis to Tfilah, which is the whole inyan of Elul which we just discussed. Elul is the month of Rachmim and a month of Tfilah. However, Elul also has a shaykhis to Torah. And very, very obvious is the shaykhis from Elul to Torah. That is when Moshe went to get the Luchos Shniyos. And when did Moshe come down with the Luchos Shniyos? Moshe came down with the Luchos Shniyos on Yom Kippur. So Mamela, it is the month of Elul that has an extremely obvious shaykhs, to the Indian of Torah as well. And that is what the pasuk says. Ani l'doidi v'doidi li, and the pasuk goes ahead. Haroye b'shoshanim. So Chazal, Shoshana meaning a rose, and b'negeya Shoshana we find in Chazal, Ma Shoshana islo treisar alin, just like the Shoshana, the rose has 13 petals. The very same, we find the Indian of Yud Gimel, we find Sai B'negeya Torah, and when Sai B'negeya Tefillah. B'negeya Tefillah, we know they are Yud Gimel Midas HaRachmim, so it's again obvious the Shaykhs of Elul, Ani l'doidi v'doidi li to Tefillah. But even B'negeya Torah, it's also very obvious. They are the Yud Gimel Midas HaTorah Nedreshes Behem. So Memela, when we're talking about Elul, Ani l'doidi v'doidi li aroya b'shoshanim, so the Shoshana also has a Shaykhs to Torah as well. So that is why in the Hagoyas of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, when it comes to the Indian of Elul, there is take a shaykhs between Elul and the Indian of Bina. Pirkei Avos, as the Alter Rebbe writes in the introduction to Pirkei Avos in the Siddur, there are those that fear sich to recite Pirkei Avos every Shabbos between Pesach and Shavuos. However, there is also a Yeshnoi again. There are some that fear sich to recite Pirkei Avos as well, for all the Shabbos Hakayits, for all the Shabbosim throughout the entire summer. Rabbi explained that when we're talking about a minhag, when we say that it is everyone's custom to say Pirkei Avos between Pesach and Shavuos. However, there are Yeshnoi again, there are some that fear sich also to say it for the entire Shabbos Hakayits. So we must say that the minhag, the toikef ha-minhag, the strength of the minhag is definitely much stronger. A minhag which is adopted by all is definitely a stronger minhag than a minhag which is not adopted by all. So therefore, the Indian of reciting Pirkei Avos between Pesach and Shavuos is definitely much stronger than reciting Pirkei Avos the entire summer. However, we still find in the Menhagim of the Rabbeim that there are many Ma'amorim from the Rabbeim of later weeks than Shavuos, in other words, summer weeks, that begin with a Mishnah of Pirkei Avos. And the beginning of a Maimer is usually an identification either to a pasuk in that Sedra, or an Indian that has a shaykhs to that date, or if it is a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, this shows that the Rabbeim did hold from the minhag from reciting Pirkei Avos not only between Pesach and Shavuos, but Kol Shabbos Hakayits. And that is why there are Mamorim that begin with the beginning of a Mishnah in Avos, even in later weeks after Shavuos as well. Perek Shishi, which falls out this week, has an open shaykhs to Torah. Why is this? Because in the original minhag of reciting Pirkei Avos between Pesach and Shavuos, this Perek Shishi, is the Perek that's recited on the Shabbos before Shavuos. So as the proper Perek, which is recited on the Shabbos before Shavuos, that is why this Perek discusses the greatness of Torah. If we are to look for a proper Mishnah to learn this Shabbos afternoon, the Rebbe Zalman says, being that we're constantly stressing that we are entering the month of Elul, and Elul is a great month because Elul is a Chodesh HaRachmim, it's a month of Tefillah, we have to look for a Mishnah in this Perek that has some sort of a shaykhs to Tefillah. What is this Mishnah? It's a Mishnah that discusses Beis HaMikdash. Being that we know Tefillos b'mokum karbonos tiknum, that we have tefillah now, tefillah substitutes for karbonos. Therefore, it's appropriate to discuss the Mishnah which deals with the Beis HaMikdash. And that is Mishnah Yud and Perek Shishi, where the Mishnah says, Chamisha kinyonim kona HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'olamim. The Rebishter has 5 possessions which are extremely dear to him. Ve'elohim, Torah, Shemayim va'aretz, Avram, and Yisrael, and Beis HaMikdash. Let us go to the part of the Mishnah which talks about Beis HaMikdash. Beis HaMikdash minayin. So the Mishnah brings a raya from 2 psukim. The Chsiv, Mochain l'shiftecha pa'alta Hashem, Mikdash Hashem kainenu yedecha. That's 1 pasuk. V'aymer, another raya, Vayeviyem el gvul kachay, har zeh konse yemin. So it's a rayim that the Beis HaMikdash is a kinyan of HaKadosh Baruch. So, first of all, the Rebbe is raising the question, if we're talking about Har Zeh, the Pasuk. Har Zeh obviously applies to Har HaBayis. We're talking about the Har as Har HaBayis. We're not talking about it specifically as the Beis HaMikdash. However, we're talking about an inyan of Beis HaMikdash, and the Rebbe stressed that let us hope that the fact that we are talking about and learning an inyan that has a shaykhus to Beis HaMikdash will lead to it that very, very soon we will have the Beis HaMikdash physically in our hands, where we'll be able to be makriv karbanos in the Beis HaMikdash begashmis. Mishnah says Beis HaMikdash minayin. The Mishnah brings a raya from a pasuk. The chsiv mochoin l'shiftecha pa'alta Hashem mikdash Hashem kaininu yedecha. It's a pasuk which we recite daily in the Shir of Oz Yashir. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have set up a place for you to rest. Mikdash Hashem kaininu yedecha. Actually, that's the whole meaning of the Beis HaMikdash, as the pasuk says. Pasuk uses the expression Madach hashamayim ushmei hashamayim lo yechal kalucha. The heavens are too small to have the Rebbe to dwell in it. Va'af ki abayis hazeh. Could it be that this house will be a house of Shechina for the Rebbe? As there are different perushim, there are some that learn the pasuk in a sort of tmiyah, that it's a wonder. Shamayim ushmei hashamayim lo yechal kalucha. How is it that this house can? But what we do see is that this house, this Beis HaMikdash, this is a mochin l'shiftecha, this is where the Rebbe has selected that for him to dwell the Shechina into this place. There's an expression in the Rambam, that the Rambam expresses himself that the whole idea of the Beis HaMikdash is because of the karbonos which are brought there. The Rambam uses the expression that it has to be a mokoim muchan, a place prepared for the karbonos to be brought, which this brings about for the Shechina to rest in the spot. Rebbe is tying together the expression in the Rambam, muchan, mokoim muchan, a place which is prepared for the bringing of karbonos, to the word mochain l'shiftecha pa'alta Hashem. The word mochain, a dwelling, has the same letters as the word muchan, just a little bit different. But the mem, chaf, vav, and langan are here in both words. So this again comes to strengthen, to show the fact that the Beis HaMikdash is a mochain l'shiftecha pa'alta Hashem. Why is this a mochain l'shiftecha pa'alta Hashem? Why is this the area for you, Rabbeinu Shalom, where you, Rabbeinu Shalom, are going to dwell? Because this is the mochain muchan. This is the place which is prepared, where Yidden come and serve the Rebbe by bringing karbanos and all other avodas which are required to do in the Beis HaMikdash. So that is what the Mishnah stresses. Beis HaMikdash minayin. T'ksiv mochain l'shiftecha pa'alta Hashem mikdash Hashem kaininu yedecha. Mochain having a shaykhus to the word, to this whole description which the Rambam gives about the Beis HaMikdash, beginning with the word muchan, and then the pasuk goes va'ema va'yiviem el gvul kodshay. Har zeh konsa yeminoi. So here the Rebbe is learning, obviously true, Har zeh is the Har HaBayis, but what is the whole inyan of the Har HaBayis? The whole inyan of the Har HaBayis is because of what is the whole greatness of the Har HaBayis? Because of the Beis HaMikdash which rested on the Har HaBayis. So that is why the second raya, va'yiviem el gvul kodshay har zeh konsa yeminoi, the Har zeh konsa yeminoi stresses that Har zeh, this mountain, Konsa, is a kinyan of Yeminah, of his right hand. In other words, this is the Raya, what the Mishnah began saying, Chamisha kinyanim kana HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'ilamai, and that the Beis HaMikdash is a kinyan of the Rebbe. This is taka expressed in this pasuk, because this pasuk here uses the expression, Har zeh Konsa Yeminah. Just dawned on me. Very back in the first Sikha, the Rebbe was talking the great love that has to be expressed to each and every Yid. So the Rebbe referred to the Navi Yeshaya. Yeshaya Navi says, who is greater than the Navi Yeshaya? Yeshaya was selected by the Rabbeinu Shalom to serve as a Navi. Sidus always stresses that the word Yeshaya stems from the word Yeshua, help, assistance. So this in itself shows us the greatness of the Navi Yeshaya, that his whole inyan was to bring Yeshua, to bring hope, and to bring assistance to the Yid. Still we find in Nevuas Yeshaya that when Yeshaya expressed himself with very harsh words, B'negei Klal Yisrael, Rabbeinu Shalom protested it, and he criticized Yeshaya very strongly for using such harsh words on Klal Yisrael. So from here the Rebbe says we can derive that when we go out to criticize Yidden, with what kind of love this has to be done. That not taking a Kal V'chomer from Yeshaya. Yeshaya was a Navi Hashem, and was selected by the Eibishter to go ahead and criticize Yidden. This was the whole inyan of a Navi, to bring techacha, to bring criticism to Klal Yisrael. At the same time, when he went ahead and went a little bit overboard and used expressions which he shouldn't, the Rebbeinu Shalom criticized him for it. So again, the Rebbe derived, what do we see from this? We see from this that whenever we go ahead to criticize a Yid, to bring a message to uplift any Yid whom we have a shaychus with, it has to be done with an extreme amount of love and not in any negative form whatsoever. In last week's Farbrengen, we usually always try to go over Nekudis. Fortunately, we cannot do more within the frame of an hour, but there's one thing the Rebbe mentioned last week. We did not mention it at all. It's an interesting thing. The Rebbe said he would like to share a Psura Toiva, good news, with us in last week's Farbrengen. The good news that the Rebbe had was that it was the Rebbe did not mention the names, but that was that in two countries, in two capitals of two countries, in Central and South America, the Tanya was reprinted. And the Rebbe, again, we know that the Rebbe mentioned it many times already, that any area, any Medina, any country, any city which has Yidden in it, it is extremely appropriate, it's advisable that the Tanya should be reprinted in that city. And as the Tanya, we refer to the Tanya as the Torah Shebiksav of Chasidus. The Rebbe stressed that now that the Torah Shebiksav of Chasidus was printed in those countries, and countries which, general countries in Central and South America, which are definitely far, far from Yiddishkeit as Yiddishkeit should be. So hopefully this will lead that not only for the spreading of the Torah Shebiksav of Chasidus, but also for the Torah Shebal Peh of Chasidus, which is the entire concept of Afotas HaMayonis, bringing Mayonis Chutza, which will lead to the Ka'asimah.